The Book of Genesis by Robert S. Candlish, Chapter 12. The Constitution of the New World in its three departments of nature, providence, and grace. 3. The election of grace. Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 to 29. Quote, "Charity rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth." End quote. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 6. Quote, "Salvation is of the Jews." End quote. John chapter 4, verse 22. The narrative which closes the history of the flood introduces the long history of grace contending with nature, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent drawing off again to their respective sides. The enmity remains, and the warfare is resumed. A single incident is selected to illustrate its recommencement. An isolated picture is presented to us, a picture, however, most affecting and full of meaning, as much so as was the scene which began the struggle in the world before the flood. In either case, it is a domestic scene, a family picture, that is exhibited. In the one case, two brothers, in the other, a father and his three sons, open the grand drama of which the wide earth is to be the stage, and of which the issues are to be eternal. Noah, with Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and perhaps also Canaan, the son of Ham, such is the little household group, among whom we are to recognize all the features of grace and nature respectively, of the church and the world, as they mutually oppose and at the same time influence one another. How they usually lived together is not said. How they acted on one memorable day is all that we are told, but that is enough. It reveals both Satan's malice and the power of the Spirit of God. Noah is overtaken in a fault. He, quote, "began to be an husbandman, and planted a vineyard, and drank of the wine, and was drunken," end quote. Verses 20 and 21. It is an unwanted offence. The very use which Ham makes of it proves it to be so. But that such a blot should fall, even once only, on the character of such a man is grief enough, and far more than enough. What can we say? What can we think? How could Noah be so left to himself, even in one solitary instance? And why, when nothing else in the history of his latter days is left on record, should this most painful narrative be preserved? Alas! Is it not needed? Has wine ceased to be a mocker, or strong drink to be raging? Or have men, even wise men, ceased to be deceived thereby? Are the servants of God, heirs though they be of the righteousness that is by faith, preachers of righteousness too, never tempted now to tarry at the wine, to go to seek the mixed wine? Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1, chapter 23, verses 29 to 32. But it is the conduct of Ham and Canaan on this sad occasion that is emphatically stigmatized. For it would seem that Canaan had some share in the offence committed, as he certainly had a principal share in the doom pronounced. What precisely that offence was can scarcely be gathered from the narrative, although we may partly guess its motive. It was obviously an instance of flagrant filial irreverence, for not even the last degree of unworthiness in a parent will justify the levity or cruelty of a son, far less a single instance of his being overcome when tempted. But the real explanation of his behaviour must be sought in some deeper motive. Mere wanton disrespect could never, of itself, carry a son so far as he went. Foolish, giddy, wilful as he might be, who that had not some more malignant end to serve could find his father as Noah was found, and make the discovery a matter of jest or of exultation? But Ham had another quarrel with his father. He hated his religion. He not merely dishonoured him as a parent, he disliked him as a preacher of righteousness. Hence his satisfaction, his irrepressible joy, when he caught the patriarch in such a state of degradation. Ah! He has found that the godly man is no better than his neighbours. He has got behind the scenes. He has made a notable discovery, and now he cannot contain himself. Forth he rushes, all hot and impatient, to publish the news, so welcome to himself. And if he can meet with any of his brethren who have more sympathy with this excessive sanctity than he has, what a relief, what a satisfaction, to cast this choice specimen in their teeth, and so make good his right to triumph over them and their faith ever after. The temptation presented to them by their younger brother to join with him in the ribald mockery, the elder sons of Noah resisted, and in doing so they proved not only the depth of their filial respect and duty, but the strength also of their religious convictions. They dared to be true and faithful to the cause of God, which they had espoused, in the most trying circumstances in which any man can well be called to maintain it. For how did they deal with the scandal which their unfeeling brother so recklessly exposed? Did they treat it lightly? Did they affect to get rid of it by some plausible excuse? No. They do not give Ham the advantage which he would have had over them, if they had manifested indifference to their father's conduct, or had begun to palliate and defend it. They evidently show that they are alive to the full baseness and guilt of the offence. What they do is their testimony and protest against the sin. The manner in which they do it is the token of their continued attachment to him who has sinned, as well as to the faith which, notwithstanding this sin, they still believe that he truly holds. They treated Noah as one who had grievously fallen, but at the same time they treated him as one who, before his fall, had been the upholder and representative of the cause of God, and who would still, by God's grace, be raised again and restored. And now, when Noah awakes out of his wine, and knows what his younger son has done unto him, what may his feelings be expected to be? If we read the verses in succession without a break or pause, connecting the curse which Noah pronounced with his awaking to a knowledge of the manner in which he had been treated, verses 24 and 25, the narrative would suggest the idea of personal resentment and indignation, and, doubtless, in the circumstances, such an emotion on the part of the father and the patriarch would be both natural and righteous. It is to be observed, however, that no such emotion is ascribed to Noah by the sacred history itself. It is not said that he uttered the prophecy which follows under the impulse of provocation or of passion, and the entire omission of the very name of Ham would seem intended for the very purpose of proving the absence of all personally vindictive feeling. These two parts, indeed, of this narrative are to be kept clear and distinct from one another. The fall of Noah is not at all connected with his prophecy, except, perhaps, that it served to bring out the real character of his children, and so to reconcile him to the different destinies which he was to announce as awaiting their respective races. For it would seem that he had not previously discerned with sufficient clearness the antagonist principles of faith and unbelief, of godliness and worldliness, as they were at work in his own household, and was soon to divide the world. Noah, we are told, awoke, and immediately after we find that he prophesied. This is all the account given us of his recovery from his grievous fall. But that he was humbled to the dust, as David was in the like case, who can doubt? Of David's repentance, the notice in the history is very nearly as brief as what is here taken of Noah's. It is from the mournful strains of his psalms that we learn the secret experience of his soul. Noah also, we may be sure, passed through a similar experience. His sin was now ever before him, and certainly if anything could aggravate his bitter sense of guilt and shame, as he thought of the just offence he had given to his God, it must have been the discovery which he made respecting the conduct of his sons. That one of them, the youngest, and perhaps the best beloved, should have treated him so rudely was sufficiently mortifying to his parental feelings, but that was as nothing in comparison with the reflection that it was his own father who had put a stumbling block in his way, and proved the guilty cause of the profane outbreak which at last stamped the character and sealed the doom of his child. Nor could he fail to consider the very different conduct of the two elder brethren. To what a trial had he exposed their principles! They had indeed stood the test. But how little could this have been anticipated, how easily might it have been otherwise! The very reverence and awe, moreover, with which they executed their painful task, must have conveyed to Noah, when made aware of it, a terrible rebuke. Truly it could be no light matter thus to minister to the evil passion of him who sinned, and thus to wound also and lacerate the best principles and affections of those who did so well. As the incident recorded respecting Noah and his family gives a picture of the church in its beginning, so the prophecy which follows, verses 25 to 27, reveals to us the church in its progress. The unequal struggle has commenced again between the church and the world, and ominous enough has the commencement been. The ungodly son has gained an advantage. The faithful are scandalized and discouraged. But he who, quote, maketh the wrath of man to praise him, end quote, turns the worst actions to account for vindicating his honour and accomplishing his purposes. Thus, in this instance, he interposed to rebuke the proud and raise the lowly, and he did so by the instrumentality of the restored patriarch himself. Canaan is judicially condemned and sentenced to a degrading servitude. Quote, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. End quote. Verse 25. This may be viewed partly as a retributive judgment pronounced on Ham, dooming him to suffer, in the tenderest part, in those very parental affections which, in the case of his father, he had so cruelly mocked and scorned. It may be viewed also as an intimation of what, in the ordinary course of nature, must be the consequence of such sin as Ham had committed, and of such an evil spirit as he had shown. Himself an apostate, his son and his seed are cursed. But in the midst of deserved wrath, God remembers mercy, and, accordingly, the curse is here restricted to his seed in the line of Canaan. The punishment to which he is sentenced is servitude or bondage, a double bondage to both his father's brethren. It is thrice specified, and forms, indeed, the melancholy burden of this brief prophetic song. For the prophecy is in the form of a poem, and consists of 3 stanzas, in which the first line varies, while the last sadly reiterates the same solemn note of woe. Quote, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. Blessed be Jehovah, the God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. End quote. Verses 25 to 27. In the first of these couplets, Canaan's doom is generally announced. He is to be a servant of servants. The expression is emphatic. He is to hold a position of peculiarly degraded subjection to both his brethren, for so the doom is explained in the 2 following couplets, in the first of which subjection to Shem is specified, and in the second, subjection to Japheth. In addition to the couplet which opens the poem, and is expressly designed for Canaan, it is deemed necessary, in the 2 other couplets, to repeat the sentence, in the way of contrast or antithesis to the blessings pronounced on the 2 brothers respectively, who had been found faithful. In this view, a special reason may be suggested, both for the selection of Canaan as the only one of Ham's seed who was cursed, and for the repetition of the curse twice over in connection with the blessing which Shem and Japheth were severally to receive. It was Canaan who, more than any other of Ham's descendants, was to come into contact with Shem and Japheth, and to interfere with them in their enjoyment of their privileges. For what were these? 1. In the case of Shem, the blessing is indirect and reflex, but on that very account it is the more precious. Quote, blessed be Jehovah, the God of Shem. End quote. The prophetic father, beholding afar off the highly favoured descendants of his highly honoured son, fixes his devout eye not on their prosperous and happy state, but on the glory of that great and holy name, with whose honour their welfare is to be inseparably blended. What prerogative can equal that which this form of salutation implies? I hail as blessed, not my son, but him who condescends to be his God. It is not, quote, blessed be Shem, end quote, but, quote, blessed be Jehovah, the God of Shem, end quote. Jehovah, the God of Shem, is the blessed one. How blessed, then, he whose God Jehovah is? Quote, blessed is that people whose God is the Lord, end quote. Evidently, the blessing refers, in the first instance, to the line of Eber, who is singled out from all the other descendants of Shem, Genesis chapter 10, verse 21, and ultimately to the family of Abraham, with whom the covenant was established, Genesis 12. But when the time came for the fulfillment of this prediction, when the race of Shem, in the line of Eber and the family of Abraham, were to inherit the blessing, when Israel was to possess the Lord's land and assume his position as the Lord's people, who stood in the way? Who but Canaan, by whom the land was preoccupied? Quote, the Canaanites were in the land, end quote. Genesis chapter 12, verse 6, Exodus chapter 3, verse 8, et passim. 2. Again, as to Japheth, what is the prophetic announcement? Quote, God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, end quote. He is to be, quote, enlarged, end quote, or, as the word may be rendered, persuaded. And he is to, quote, dwell in the tents of Shem, end quote, to partake of his privileges and be adopted into his communion. In a word, to become one with Shem in respect of that religious blessedness which is implied in Jehovah being his God. For, quote, to dwell in the tents of Shem, end quote, is to have a common lot with the people whose God is the Lord, and amid whose habitations the Lord has his tabernacle. With a view to this, Japheth is to be, quote, enlarged, end quote, or persuaded. He is to be, quote, enlarged, end quote, invested with universal empire, or he is to be, quote, persuaded, plied with influences fitted to open the way for the progress and diffusion of sound doctrine. And this is to be preliminary to his, quote, dwelling in the tents of Shem, end quote, and having the God of Shem, the blessed Jehovah, as his portion. Who can fail to recognize in this prediction the calling of the Gentiles, who spring from Japheth, and the preparation of the world for the first preaching of the gospel? When the Gentiles were invited to be fellow heirs with the Jews of the grace of life, Japheth began to dwell in the tents of Shem. And when, previous to Christ's coming and the preaching of his gospel, the Roman power was peacefully established throughout the whole earth, and amplest means of communication and communion were thus afforded, and men's minds in all Gentile nations, as well as among the Jews, were hushed into a state of strange expectancy, then might be recognized that enlargement or persuasion of Japheth, which was foretold as appointed to precede and usher in his dwelling in the tents of Shem. But it is especially remarkable that in the course of this enlargement or persuasion on the part of Japheth, the main obstruction which he met arose from Canaan. When Rome was laying the foundations of that wide dominion which, by securing peace, along with free and safe intercourse through all the world, contributed more than any other external cause to the early success of the gospel, her only formidable rival was Carthage, a colony of Tyre, sprung from Sidon, one of the sons of Canaan. Canaan was to stand in the way of Japheth, as well as of Shem, but his opposition, it was intimated, would be in vain. His proud race would bend the knee to Japheth as well as to Shem. The conqueror of Rome's armies, himself at last defeated, would be compelled, at Rome's gates, reluctantly to recognize the fortune of Carthage. The curse of Canaan is upon the wealthy Tyrian colony, while Japheth must continue to be enlarged and persuaded. Rome must reign, that the world may be Christianized. Such is the meaning of the curse denounced against Canaan, and such its intimate bearing on the blessings which Shem and Japheth severally received. The curse is on Canaan, as representing his descendants generally. It is upon his race, in their collective character. That multitudes among them might be individually saved is quite compatible with this public doom. The Syrophoenician woman, to whom our Lord extended his kindness, furnishes an instance in point. Even in the Jewish dispensation, a Canaanite, after the third generation, might be received into fellowship, and to all of every race the grace of the gospel is free. But the curse conveys a warning. If God intends to bless any people called by his name, or dwelling in the tents of those who are so called, Canaan may not oppose the divine purpose with impunity. If he do, it is in vain. It is at his peril. The mountain is removed and cast into the sea. The world after the flood is now launched on the stream of time, having received its constitution in its three departments or kingdoms of nature, providence, and grace. In the kingdom of nature, wise laws are ordained, conducive to the purity, peace, and prosperity of social life, and to the best interests of each individual soul. In the kingdom of providence, again, a dispensation of forbearance is established, and the Lord waits to be gracious. And, finally, as regards the kingdom of grace itself, the precarious and perilous standing of the church in an evil world is brought out in the dark commencement of the struggle, whose brighter issue, however, prophecy begins to unfold. That prophecy has already been partially fulfilled, but the end has not yet come. Jehovah is once more to be blessed as the God of Shem, for he has not cast off Israel. Japheth, still further enlarged, is to dwell in Shem's tents, when Israel's return shall be to the Gentiles as life from the dead. And if Canaan is again to offer opposition, it can only be in order that the full meaning of that early curse may be seen in all its terror in the latter days.